Thank you for the invitation. I always gladly come back here because the food is definitely delicious at Lamberti. My doctor told me I need to gain some weight, so... There. Last night, this book, Living in Our Time, Living Without Fear in the Age of Uncertainty, was presented. So I definitely won't do a presentation, since you all could actually, indeed comfortably watch the video of yesterday's presentation at home, if you haven't already. And since it was presented by one of the authors, I surely could say something less, right? What I would like to do with you, starting from the reading of these books that we have shared with Father Beppe, is to extend an invitation to read, to indicate what those questions, those issues, those experiences and concerns and aspects that this book addresses are. I want to somehow draw on your experience and suggest a path that I have taken, which might also make you want to pick up this book, read it, and compare your life, your questions, your experiences with what this book proposes. This is not a summary of the contents, but an invitation to read. And this invitation is made in 4 points, so you can already prepare yourselves. The first point I would call the collapse of certainties, an expression that also appears in the book to indicate that what we once believed to be evident is not that it no longer exists, but it is no longer evident. It is no longer as clear as it once was. I illustrate this collapse of certainties with 3 episodes that perhaps have happened to you in a similar way to how I will describe them. The first episode concerns a few years ago during my life in the beautiful and ancient city of Rome, where there was a very skilled and very Roman cleaning lady who, the day after Corpus Christi, asked, so we lived in a building that overlooked the terrace, where the Pope concluded the Corpus Christi procession, and so we decorated festively, we prepared everything meticulously and carefully. And the lady said, so how did this grand Corpus Christi procession go? I mean, it was absolutely beautiful. There were so many people, and it was such a sight to see. She also said that she wanted to take her son to see the city from the outskirts, to get some fresh air and enjoy the scenery, since he's always stuck in his neighborhood, unable to explore new places, but then she was tired. However, she will definitely take him to the Gay Pride event in 2 weeks. For her, the 2 events, Corpus Christi and Gay Pride, which were 2 weeks apart, were completely equivalent and equally important. She said this about the priests, not about the passers-by on the street who were just going about their day. The second episode, where things get a bit more serious and intense, involves a very dear friend of mine who teaches religion at school. He deals with complex ethical issues such as the beginning of life, the end of life, and heterologous fertilization. A girl in the class raises her hand and says, "There's a problem here." What exactly is the problem? It's not that I don't agree. The problem is that the church doesn't agree with me. How does the church not agree with you? She says, indeed, that based on what you said, I actually should definitely not exist, because I was born from a test tube, from an implantation in my mother's uterus. What kind of church is a church that says I shouldn't be here? An open question. The third issue to describe the world we are in is that we talk a lot about youth discomfort. We talk a lot about the lack of places that welcome youth discomfort. We need institutions that prevent the worst, that these young people reject life. A few days ago, you all heard the news that an institution that should welcome and promote life, not in the least of its attendees, but in its highest role, that is the rector, shows the figure of a man who rejects life. These are all signs of our time. I am referring to the fact that the rector of the Catholic University took his own life. These are all undeniably signs of our time in which we see, on one hand, the end of certain well-established institutions. The role of Corpus Christi is not understood. Some ethical guidelines of the Church are not understood, almost as if a place that was supposed to be educational gives a counter-testimony. However, on the other hand, within these controversial phenomena that are indeed signs of our time, certain needs are actually manifested. The need for a sense of life. What can be opposed to the sixth floor from which to jump? What is a reason to live? And it can't be money, career, or professional success that this man had, perhaps? Why am I in the world? What is my identity? What the girl was asking. Who recognizes me? Third, love your children, let them get some fresh air, introduce them to the whole reality. Well, three very legitimate needs that, however, are indeed expressed in a controversial way, or at least in a way that does not recognize or contradicts what the Church has usually offered, generally. A Corpus Christi procession, an important Catholic institution, and guidelines for life. This is to say what this book, The End of Christianity, says, but which another author, Taylor, has been saying for some time, is evident to everyone. The Christian society no longer exists. There is that society in which the references given by Christians were indeed a point of reference, a shared point of orientation for everyone. In fact, as a matter of fact, on the contrary, these references are frequently contradicted, misunderstood, or even devalued. This author uses this amusing image, saying it seems that Christian ideals are now like an ant tickling the ankles of a giant. They no longer influence anything. So in the face of this challenging situation, a common temptation or an attempt that we all have is to clearly and concisely restate what Christianity truly and fundamentally is, ensuring that its core principles and beliefs are accurately communicated and understood. Since it is indeed misunderstood, contradicted and devalued, it is necessary to take action and clearly restate what Christians clearly meant. In this specific case, in particular, for example, what does Eucharist mean? What does the value of life mean? What does love between a man and a woman mean? It's somewhat the temptation of the fortress, so to speak, a safe place where values are clearly stated and comprehensively understood. In some way, it protects others from getting confused, from making mistakes by entering the mentality of everyone. This environment ensures that individuals are shielded from the complexities and uncertainties that might arise in less structured situations. There is indeed a somewhat astonishing and beautiful novel that was recently released called Lunita by a Scandinavian writer, I believe, Unrevised, quite unpronounceable as a name, where he truly says that in the face of the crisis of meaning that many men experience because they feel somewhat useless, a large sanatorium called Lunita is established. In this place, where all those who are useless or who are seen as dispensable by society are called in and given a meaningful purpose for their life. For example, you don't have children, just like I don't have children. What do you need a uterus for? We'll remove it. We'll give it to another woman who needs it. But you must abdicate all your freedom to the clinic of unity, because it is the one that controls your life and will make you feel useful. There is indeed a truly substantial advantage to this truly remarkable ideal that echoes that of the Grand Inquisitor. I take away your freedom so you feel useful and don't make mistakes. But the great advantage is that around outside the clinic of the unit, outside these Christian fortresses where the rules of tradition are clearly reiterated, there is the whole world. There continues to be a large number of people in the crowd, many people who do not understand and seek meaning, and numerous others who are still searching. They continue to ask the questions about the cases we mentioned earlier, and they are still very curious. And the big question that every Christian might ask, and here in some way or another Taylor asks it in the book, is to say that it's fine to avoid making mistakes, it's fine to recover tradition, but those who are outside of our faith, are they just evil? Are they just enemies? Do they have nothing to tell us, to help us rediscover our faith, to tell us something important, essential, and significant about our lives? And anyway, as soon as we look at them, so distinct from us, they scare us. They are certainly there asking us to account for their very existence. Here is the first major problem. I will finish the first point. The collapse of certainties shows us the collapse of Christianity, and there are still many people who, although they have known Christianity, use Christian values but do not understand them. How do we relate to them? In my opinion, and according to all these authors as well, it is a temptation to shut oneself in a fortress, to draw a boundary between us and them. Let's move to the next point. Perhaps these people who do not think like us, who actually use our values in the opposite way, push us, let's call it the second point, openness to reality. They push us to remember that even in Jesus' time, he did not convert everyone. In the time of Jesus, Jesus did not start from Rome. He did not even speak Latin, nor did he speak Greek, as his disciples did. He indeed left America and China unevangelized, but he started with 12. It is not necessary for the whole world to become Christian, but it is indeed very necessary to come to the realization that there is always a majority of the world that is not Christian. Openness to reality means truly understanding that the other is always greater than what I think of them, and is always more than what I think of them. You see, we can say tonight we are 200, 150, I don't know how many we are. A lot, it's wonderful, but you know what a small part we are compared to all those who are outside, a speck. So, realizing this, that Christians, even if all 1 billion Christians gathered in one place in the world, would not be the majority of the world. Why do I say this? Because Christianity, as Father Giussani has taught us many times, has not been exempt in its history from being a victim of a conception of reason, where we had control over all reality, or at least we would have been reasonable at the moment we had control over all reality, where we possessed all the elements of reality. Well, Father Giussani teaches us, and the authors of this book also say, that this is not the Christian ideal of reason. Rather, this is the modern ideal of reason, where a man must reach the end of the day and control his entire day, feeling like the master of his life. Jesus actually, if you remember, indeed said that the man who reaches the evening and says, "You have eaten, you have drunk, you have stored up in your barns, and now you can finally truly rest," was ultimately a fool. He was not a reasonable man, but a fool, because it says, "Tonight your soul will be required of you," as it says in the 12th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. You thought that maybe you would have been reasonable if you had control of your day, but you forgot the most obvious fact, that you are not self-created, and your rationale is not about controlling reality, bringing all reality to conform to your measures, but your rationale is an openness to reality, starting from the evidence that, indeed, at this moment you are not self-made. In fact, that's why I say that the fact there are so many people who think so differently from us is indeed the first provocation to open our minds every time to say, see, I still don't actually have control. Just a few evenings ago, a family man came to visit me who has an incredibly demanding job that drains all your energy, almost even on Saturdays and Sundays. and he does it amazingly well. He managed to buy a house, have a second daughter. Truly impressive. He told me, however, the other night, and for a few nights nowadays, I sit in the armchair and at the end of the day, I feel completely, truly dissatisfied because I realize that I don't actually have control over everything. Really. And I told him, thank goodness, indeed, truly, this vanishing point is your salvation. While we often think that when we don't have control over everything, sometimes like parish priests who have to control how the tablecloth is set, the number of incense grains, and even where the parishioners have parked, it's a good thing you don't know everything. It's a good thing you haven't controlled everything. Because now you can ask yourself who saves your life and the life of your daughters. And another friend of mine struck me by riding the wave of this reflection, saying he had to make a really tough decision at work and couldn't decide because he realized he was missing several crucial elements. There were simply too many factors at play. So he decided that this summer, this year, he would spend a long weekend. He has a very physically and mentally demanding job, and the weekend is indeed crucial to do the Macerata Loreto. And this moved me because it reminded me of Anna Vercour, who, in the Annunciation to Mary, seeing the crisis of the monastery, seeing the war, seeing all the messes in society, does not try to fix them, but sets off on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. That is, it opens up to another, to a beyond, which is not him, but the one who creates it. And this, in my opinion, is the openness that we Christians are required to have in a society that is no longer Christian, no longer Christianized. Asking ourselves, what do these realities, these others who belong to different religions, who have no religion, who use Christianity as they see fit, have to say to us? How can one become increasingly open to reality? And Taylor in this book talks about disciplines and concepts that thoroughly and deeply open you up more and more, which are explained in detail and help you open your eyes. Earlier, I was having dinner with my friend Christian, who said, in the morning when I start my day and I'm feeling really down, I listen to 3 songs, including the one we just heard, Mascagni, because they help. This sense of discipline fills your heart and opens it up beyond. So in such a society, we don't need to lock ourselves in our fortresses where we see others as enemies, but rather find aids that help us keep our eyes open to the whole reality. And we know well that those who are more certain are always more open, while those who are more uncertain are always more closed. So, what certainty can keep our eyes open to the true nature of reality as we perceive it? And on this important note, I move to the third and final point. The third point out of 4 is, I would say, in my opinion, the self is reborn in an encounter significantly, because I could say that your eye does not open wide even in front of the enemy if you keep it open with a toothpick. You strive to stay open to reality, but it happened to me that you really start to open up to the other, to the world of the other, to a world that is not yours, when this world somehow meets you, impacts you, reaches you. It's easy to talk about the challenges and complexities of migrants until your daughter gets involved in a serious relationship with a foreigner from a different culture. Then it hits you, and you have to take a stance. It's easy to talk about illness and how it influences us in unpredictable and often incomprehensible ways until it happens to you, that is reality, which is so vast and so immense that it only confronts us through an impact. And this is crucial and essential to remember, because as Taylor says in this insightful book, we always have a vision. He uses this somewhat strange and peculiar word, a disembodied and detached view of life, as if we had to understand what is right, what is wrong to do, abstracting ourselves from the flesh, abstracting ourselves from what has happened to us, from experience. Instead, man learns what touches him, because by touching he discovers the real boundaries of the other. If I go against Father Beppe, I get pushed back because it is something that indeed opposes me, and it is his reality that forces me to recognize my own reality, not his idea or my idea of him. For this reason, we indeed need to return to this encounter with the other, this encounter with human life. And as Williams indeed says in the text, as he eloquently states, each and every human life truly calls us to pay attention, to serve it, to feel joy for it, and to deeply enter into communion with it. Very often today, also thanks to the media use we have of things, we discuss with the concept of the other, so I can say that I like or don't like the other, but can you say you like or don't like a person? You can say you like or don't like their idea, but do you actually know the other or not? Are you truly with them or not? But who among you would be happy to hear I like it or I don't like it? It's something completely reductive. So what overcomes this polarization, this concept with which we treat each other, you non-Christians, us Christians, you on one side and us on the other, is meeting each other, spending time together, living together. As it happened, I am talking about concrete experiences. For myself, I studied a bit about the relationship between Christianity and other religions in the early centuries. I tried to develop theories on the relationship between Christianity and other religions, quite complex, boring things and so on. But another thing, when you actually find your university friend really looking for you at breakfast because she indeed wants to marry this man you met, this man, yes, he was baptized, but then he became a Buddhist, and he is the man she definitely loves, and he loves her. Everything changes, and she is your friend. You see everything differently as they tell you about how they fell in love, how they stay together, what values they share, where they met, how she tells him about her encounter with the movement, and how he tells her about what he finds in Buddhism. Both are indeed loyal and clearly recount what they have come across, but only in the gathering does the true nature of the other actually and truly emerge. And when the encounter is truly successful, when the self is truly reborn in an encounter, when one does not feel classified, does not feel looked at as the Buddhist or as the Christian, but discovers that they are finally seen as someone special, unique. And there we all know, when we are looked at in this way, we are filled with a unique joy, as Williams calls it, or with a sense of non-instinctive pleasure. Pleasure in the sense that you understand you are in the right place at the right time, in total harmony. Ultimately, that profound connection which we rarely experience in our daily lives, and when we do, it leaves a lasting impression on our hearts and minds. We never forget it. We have always felt it in encounters with someone special, or when we were in contact with something that managed to touch us deeply. And this is what needs to happen today, no matter what condition we find ourselves in. To tell another example, a young man who left the movement a few years ago because he saw people convinced of things he was not convinced of at all, and believed that he had been indoctrinated as a child, goes about his life in terms of work, general life, social interactions, art, sports, and so on. And 2 weeks ago he contacted me again. No, last week he contacted me again because he wants to confess. But how come? I was with this girl, and I was even thinking of moving in with her at some point in the near future. In a musical work environment, another girl suddenly appears, and I say to myself, no, let's not get carried away. But this one was very different. She was truly different. I was deeply in love, but there was something even more. And then I find out she was deeply involved with the Franciscans. That light that seems so distant to me from those CL people, which is why I had left, came to visit me at my house. I actually wanted to throw her out because she seemed really emotionally distant, but she just came back in. This is the encounter, that meeting or encounter that can truly make you feel sought after, indeed preferred, genuinely wanted, and fills you with a unique joy, a fullness, because it corresponds to who you are. This is still possible today, especially with people who do not think completely differently from us, but whom we need to meet as individuals. And this is where we must indeed challenge ourselves. Who encounters another individual, recognizing their humanity and individuality, rather than categorizing them into a predefined group or label. I do not meet you as a homosexual or as a woman or as a Christian. I meet you because you are precious at this very moment, and I truly want to discover why God has indeed placed you on my path. Absolutely. Who has this outlook towards everyone? The Nobel laureate Jan Foss, who is indeed continuously producing one gem after another, asked why so many people are returning to God. Because after thinking they could live without God, they feel a deep need to feel unique and universal, and this need can only be fulfilled through an encounter with God, to elaborate on their feelings and experiences in their journey of faith and spirituality. So the central point where reason is reopened to the totality of reality is an encounter in which you feel unique, special, and deeply aware of the complexity around you. But here we Christians as believers can take a step further. Why do we feel so unique in our faith? Why do certain encounters manage to touch you and others don't? Why do certain moments manage to be unforgettable in your life? Because all men, we say this and so do the Jews, with this clarity, and that's it. All men, all need to find the truth, because they were created in the image and likeness of the truth. This is a fundamental belief shared by many cultures and religions. The pursuit of truth is inherent to human nature. The Jews, like many others, emphasize the importance of seeking understanding. Every single man, without exception, each and every one of them, possesses a heart that has been created by God and is meant for God. Every one of them, without a doubt. Only Christians say this clearly and unequivocally. That's why when they encounter that undeniable and profound truth, that heart explodes with overwhelming emotion. That heart bursts with an intense and powerful feeling. The fear of the other then disappears. You no longer see the other as an enemy when you discover that the person who seems so distant from you has a heart like yours, and you know what encounter made that heart explode. And so you look at that human heart with sympathy, even if it is very far from you. Very far. The word sympathy appears many times, often at multiple instances throughout the entire book. And finally, I move on to the fourth point. It is this loyalty to our humanity that makes us remember what made our hearts burst with joy, what filled our hearts with joy, which allows us to approach others with great sympathy, with great respect, as if to seek out that heart which is in the other. Earlier I gave an illustration at the table. It's as if you were, for instance, a great Egyptologist who has been studying Egyptian stars all your life, and you go to Father Bepe's garden and see a stone he uses in the garden to cut meat. You say, "Bepe, but here it is a precious treasure. This stele contains a spectacular poem from the 6th century BC. And Bepe says, "But do you realize something that I didn't have, I didn't think I had?" And so does the Christian with the man who is more foreign. Indeed. He is an expert in humanity, so he sees in the other's garden that precious ground that God has sown, and of which the other is sometimes unaware. But you have the eyes, the comprehension, indeed the understanding, the experience to see it, to be truly amazed and look with respect. The final step in the process brings a sense of completeness to the concept of freedom, and it also instills a sense of hope and optimism for the future. This fullness that you truly and genuinely experience, with which you approach others, allows you to be incredibly and absolutely free. One thing shared particularly in particular by these two books, that is by Cardinal de Kezel's book, and also especially by these three friends who speak, is that freedom is not being able to choose everything you want. This is something that indeed everyone says today. Instead, freedom truly means experiencing what it feels like to be free. It's like when there's something that fills your heart so much, but it fills your heart so much that you don't care how the exam goes, irrespective of whether it goes well or badly, how the day goes, but you're so happy that you're ready to face anything. This is freedom. A heart so full. Think of it like a bottle of water so full, so overflowing abundantly, that it no longer matters whether it is filled or emptied, because it is full of something else. And this is freedom. You see, in 3 steps. Now, I don't want to be a bit more overly pedantic, Professor, that we have certainly contradicted the usual way of thinking. A reason that does not measure, but a reason that actually opens up. A change of self that does not come through reflection, but through a carnal encounter, and a freedom that is not freedom of choice, but a fullness that makes you free. Well, with this experience of freedom, which encompasses the ability to wait for the other person's timing, you can wait for the other person to notice what you see in them, but they do not yet see. This means giving them the time and space to realize their own qualities in their own time. Think about the prodigal son, that abundant fullness he had at home. Even though he had taken half of it away, it allowed him not to go and squander away the other half chasing after the son, but it allowed him to stay at home full, so full that he rebuilt the household and had even more, so much more, so that when the son returned, there was indeed even a calf to be slaughtered for him. Truly, indeed, actually, indeed. This is indeed the complete fullness that truly makes you totally liberated from the outcome with respect to the other, and actually totally free to wait for the other's timing. Perhaps some of you have already heard me tell the story of a very, very dear friend of mine, whose daughter indeed actually made the decision to change her sex. Imagine what profoundly and deeply stirs in a mother's heart when she hears news like this. Deeply. And I provoked her a little bit further, saying, your daughter's problem is the same as your problem. It's an identity issue. You can't spare your daughter from this. And let's hope that as little harm as possible is done. But first of all, you need to clarify it for yourself. Who are you? Because you are not just a woman. You are not just your gender identity. Who are you? What do you consist of? If you are not clear about this, you will succumb to all the changes your daughter faces. If you are clear about this, who are you? You can actually stand in front of her. And she indeed told me this particular phrase of yours. What is your identity? It deeply resonated within me until one day I went to my daughter and said, I know you are experiencing a great deal of suffering, and you make the decisions and choices you want. You know what I think, but you also know this, that I am genuinely convinced there is so much great goodness within you, and whenever you want, you know that I am always here to start over with you, even when you realize you have made a mistake. Wonderful. But who can indeed throw the other into the universal comparison with everything and challenge them like that? Only those who are full and certain of who they are, that is, those who are free from the start. And this to conclude, this freedom fills you with hope. Because you know that even in the face of the darkest and most profound darkness, as Fosse always said at the end of his book, the brightness of God can shine through. Indeed, God is the only one who can make the darkness luminous and radiant, bringing light to the shadows and illuminating even the deepest corners of the soul. Just when all the lights go out, a light comes from the depths. That is only God. This is exactly what we see in the darkness, a light that shines brightly. It allows us to be Christians like never before in this modern era, in a way that is unprecedented and unparalleled. That is, if we truly and deeply realize that there is a divine light, a holy presence, that has opened our minds and hearts so much, that has embraced us so deeply and profoundly in a physical and spiritual way, making us so full of joy, so certain of our faith, so free in our spirit, that nothing in this world can stop us, not even the fear of death, because this is the time, the moment, when the resurrection must be verified and proven more than ever before. Either Christ is indeed a present God who truly makes us not fear death, or he collapses with an era. When an era ends, Christ ends, and Christianity in fact ends. Yet he told us, "I will indeed be with you until the end of the world. Even when everything collapses, I will always still be there in every moment." Until the end of the world. It is precisely this certainty that fills us so much now, just as it filled the early Christians, allowing them not to fear death, because if they died for him, they would not truly die. For this, I will tell the last thing that I personally experienced and deeply made me understand this. Two friends who, at the beginning of the year, had to fight against two very serious diagnoses, just married, a beautiful and memorable wedding like those where the two finally meet, but just a few short months after getting married, two devastating diagnoses, an aneurysm for him and a high-risk pregnancy for her with severe malformations, suggestions for abortion, and so on. How can you possibly start the year when you have two such devastating news? You never know. One says a year has passed by. What will actually happen in a year? Will my husband be there? Will this child indeed, definitely, surely, or certainly be brought into this world? And I was surprised by these young individuals who, without holding back tears or questions, one particular evening while praying the rosary with friends, he said, according to the latest diagnoses, if all goes well, the baby could be born in 9 months with these malformations. And if it is suspended, he says, and if it goes well anyway, because we know who guides our life. And this is indeed the absolute certainty of the Christian, that in a world where everything truly says the opposite, he is absolutely certain of who holds him up. And this generates a deep communion around him that is the very incarnation of that light in the midst of darkness.
We have a bit of time and space for questions or reactions to what we have heard. To elaborate further, please feel free to share your... Come up here, everyone, please. There's a microphone.
Hello, good evening, Nicholas. I had a question while listening because I would like to understand better. Thank you. When you were especially describing the fort at the beginning, etc., and then also later on, let's say, what came to my mind was, let's forget about the fort, which is fine, but this situation here is mainly a question about myself. That is, to put it in the words borrowed from Dostoevsky a few years ago. For example, such as, to put it in the words borrowed from Dostoevsky a few years ago, can an educated man of our time, in light of the current situation, still truly believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and therefore everything that follows from that, including judgment on the world and history, on the world we live in now, not on the Crusades, but on the things happening now? So the first question that comes to mind is about this concept you described. How do you see the fact that, first of all, to be free, as you said, I believe indeed that today's situation calls us to rediscover our own judgment, to confront ourselves without building a fortress, but starting from what we have encountered and the entire heritage of tradition we have. We need indeed to compare this, to see if it holds true, especially in light of all the things happening today, that we might not be able to explain because we have a weak judgment or for any other reason. And this question leads me to the second one, which is related. I think I truly understood when you say, let's not construct a fortress, let's actually reach out to others once more. The image of Batifora, a historical priest who was in Latin America, comes to mind. He was a priest with a strong character. Before giving communion, 2 hours without eating, I don't remember it because yet he found himself in a situation, for his times, that was absolutely the opposite. It was a disastrous place. That's how it was. Yet these people whom he scolded from morning till night, when he returned to Italy, they came to visit him. Poor people, not wealthy, who saved money to visit him in Italy. And he is someone who never made concessions with his character, with everything. And so I wonder, sorry if I'm going on, but I wonder how this thing here is also one, I don't know how to say it, it's not enough. Right now I can't express myself well, but the meeting alone is not enough. You also need to have something to bring that isn't just you, so that the person in front of you has a chance. I don't know how, maybe we get along, but we don't get anywhere. I'm saying it poorly. Here are these two questions.
I study the rich and complex tradition, specifically the tradition of Christianity, and I present a very straightforward and simple example that highlights the essence of my research. When around the 6th or 7th century the Eastern Empire was threatened by Muslims, the emperors firmly believed that God had indeed entrusted them with the task of defending tradition. Think of all the theological, literary, architectural, and other significant forms of tradition. Unfortunately, they began to engage in heated and intense debates about a central and crucial issue concerning our faith, namely whether icons should be adored or venerated. On this central issue regarding their tradition and other related and significant matters, they killed each other and even resorted to violence. And ultimately, a few years later, they were conquered by the Muslims. At the same time, there were poor monks in the West who were much more ignorant than them, and having nothing to live on, they began to found monasteries where they taught the barbarians. As you can read in a book among all, the Doson, which highlights the formation of Western civilization, they taught the barbarians who Augustine was, who Ambrose was, who Cicero was, naturally destroying the tradition in the eyes of the Easterners, but in reality, these men were making it survive. Because little still remains of the Eastern Empire, Europe was indeed born from the diligent and tireless work of these remarkable men. That is, what happens during a change of era, like the one we are experiencing, is not so much the problem of preserving tradition, because tradition is something you carry with you. It shapes your face, it shapes your culture. The problem is what important and significant part of this tradition allows you to reach out to others, and in a meaningful way. For this reason, I also indeed respond to your second question by saying, of course we actually have something to definitely offer. The problem is that we will understand what is essential about what we bring only by engaging with others. And it has always been this way in the life of the Church. Certain terms, certain words, certain controversies have undoubtedly and definitively been fully comprehended and thoroughly elaborated, leaving others behind only through the encounter with the other. Only thanks to the encounter with the barbarians did we understand the value of certain terms to speak about the Eucharist. And it was only in the encounter with the Greeks that we first understood the importance of certain words to speak about the Son of God. But we cannot go into detail here. Now think very deeply and very carefully about the challenge we have ahead. We definitely need to deeply understand, from everything that has shaped us and everything that fills our hearts, what is indeed absolutely essential to connect with others. But for what purpose, you might wonder, you will ask me, perhaps to conquer them? No, indeed. Don Giussani said an impressive and thought-provoking phrase in a text from the year 1997 to help convert us. Because the riches of Christ are unfathomable and we still have to discover them. And it is only in the encounter with the other that we can discover something about Christ that we thought we knew but still do not know. So indeed, the problem is not that we don't announce and proclaim Christ. Rather, the problem is that we still want to discover Christ and understand where he is calling us, because I couldn't live not only without talking about him, but also without hearing him speak. And I cannot hear him speak without truly engaging with what he has indeed given me in the reality that he places before my eyes each and every day.
Others?
This sense comes specifically to mind when I contemplate indeed, truly and deeply about the martyrdom you asked of us. That is this positive stance which is not determined by any circumstance. I don't know if it's right.
If we are asked to do something, I sincerely hope that we are not asked to take on this task. We are definitely not looking for it, and that's the absolute truth.
Yes, indeed, as a testimonial statement. The fact that someone is challenged, truly challenged, that is, they are themselves, and this challenge doesn't stop them from loving others. I don't know how to put it.
Perfect, yes, exactly. Now someone in the summer will be able to read the book about Pino Puglisi written by Alessandra da Venia, right? Thanks. What is Not Hell? A truly wonderful and incredibly fascinating book where it is beautifully shown that the beloved Don Pino died laughing, smiling at his killers. And this is one of the fundamental characteristics of martyrdom, which is the testimony to which we are all called, as you intuited. This may not be widely known, but in the early church, if someone said they were going to turn themselves into the Romans to testify to their faith, they would be condemned because it put others in a difficult position, firstly, and secondly because self-martyrdom was not to be sought, as it was a display of one's own strength. The problem was, when they asked you, are you indeed a Christian or not, if you were ready to give your life. So what was the sign of martyrdom then? The fact that you were indeed asked, and the fact that you did not actually die, as Stephen truly gives testimony by following Jesus in the Acts of the Apostles. You did not die hating your killer, because in the end you are praying for someone who is committing a mortal sin, that is murder, and instead you say, I am deeply and sincerely sorry that you have to appear guilty before God for what you are doing. So I sincerely ask forgiveness for very much indeed your actions. That smile of Don Pino. But understand, here we reach a peak where one must walk an entire whole life long time to be able to say, you who provoke me actually become an opportunity, truly, completely, entirely, for my conversion. As Livatino does, I die praying for your conversion. This truly represents entirely and completely total identification with Christ. But as Tertullian said, someone living this way indeed becomes a seed of new conversions. This paradox shows the more pressed, the Christian seed produces oil, the good fruit totally of complete conversion.
I can't understand how one can talk about values outside of a relationship with Jesus in any meaningful way, truly, genuinely. And I say this looking at reality, also to tell the children who show respect and then run away because that's how they do it. In my opinion, it's the reality of today, right? outside of the relationship with Jesus, I don't understand. You mentioned it earlier. I wanted a bit of clarification on this.
I want a clarification on your question. Please help me understand it slightly better.
So you talked about values, right? Well, I didn't understand how you can talk about values outside of the relationship with Jesus. That's what I was looking for. I mean, I wanted to understand better.
Yes. Let's say it's indeed a personal journey where everyone has to tell their own story, right? Because how does he do it? I think here lies the life of each one of us, right? Indeed, in the midst of this question, because when we were born, we all sought beauty, goodness, and satisfaction in 1,000 things, and joy and happiness and fulfillment. And first in play, then in having a family, in short, like that, each one. And what were these values? But there is a point where you comprehend that all these principles are like threads stretched towards someone who can assure them for you. That moment of realization is profound. So when you live that fullness and you say, here is everything I was looking for, here is where I finally find that joy, that fulfillment I was talking about earlier, then you say, everything else is garbage to me. All those values can ultimately become a cage, a conditioning, if there isn't this fullness that only you, Christ, can give me. In this sense, in light of the journey each of us has undertaken, we have discovered that there is no value, neither health nor family, nor all the other forms of pleasure we might seek. There is nothing that can suffice and not become a prison if he is not there. In this sense, when one discovers this, that there is no value that stands without that presence, like Zacchaeus after he met Jesus, or the Samaritan woman after she met Jesus, when you see people who have not yet met him, who are still searching for their values, so Zacchaeus sees another thief, another tax collector, or the Samaritan woman finds another woman with many husbands, how will they look at them? But full of compassion, full of sympathy. As if to say, I know the true value of that value you are seeking. What allows you to gain and grow, to truly love, to truly value and appreciate in a heartfelt and sincere manner. In this sense, this statement is radical, but makes one more open to others than ever before. As I mentioned earlier, those who are more certain are more open.